welcome to Gold Digging. This is our first vidcast. Gold Digging, which is normally a podcast where we dig for nuggets of gold from friends and associates of Stephen Webster brand. So I'm quite excited, actually, the fact that we have a vidcast and we have a great guest. So our guest today is jewellery editor, journalist, curator, and author of 4 books to date, but soon to be 5, with the imminent release of her latest book, The New Stone Age. So welcome to Gold Digging, Carol Woolton.
Thank you, Stephen. Really nice to be here.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. So I think because we are in a COVID sort of 19 situation, tell us a bit about where you are and where you're situated. It looks very nice there.
Well, I'm hunkered down in my office in London, where I am working. I have all my books here, all my research, all the things that I like to have around me. So I didn't want to isolate anywhere else. So I'm isolating in my office.
Yeah, nice. Okay, good. Well, you know, I'm in my kitchen, stroke everything, same as in a way as everybody has made do, with the multiple use of rooms that we probably thought we would never do. Mm-hmm. So The New Stone Age, your new book.
Yes. Dealing with things,
living with crystals, which I think, crystals and quartzes, etc., have been very much part, I suppose, of my jewellery career. So I'm very, very excited about your new book and the chance to talk to you about it today. So, really looking forward to that. Just before we touch on to all things crystal, I just wanted to, just to talk a little bit about your time as jewellery editor of Vogue, mm-hmm. of British mm-hmm. Vogue, of which you have been the jewellery editor for many years. And I think in that time, with your extraordinary kind of passion and devotion for jewellery, you sort of, I think, shifted the focus of what was allocated to fine jewellery in an editorial sense. To give it much more of the coverage, I think that you certainly and myself agree that it deserves. That you really pushed for that, and you managed it, and so good for you. But I think, what do you think were the sort of key elements in the last period, could say 10, 20 years or so, that have sort of elevated jewellery into something that's become so much more important for a woman's and a man's wardrobe?
Well, I think the first thing that really started kind of shaking up the jewellery industry was the fashion brands coming in a major way. Someone like Victoire de Castellan at Dior, she really was a trailblazer. I think you can look at jewellery before Victoire and after Victoire in the way that up until then, I think, we were fine jewellery, we were costume jewellery, and here came this woman making pieces that you could wear precious fine jewelry all day long that looked like costume. She really sort of turned it around, and I think by the fashion brands coming in like that and designing it with a kind of sense of freedom meant that all the fine jewelry, more sedate fine jewelry houses who really classified diamonds, sapphires, rubies and emeralds, the big 4, as precious jewels, suddenly had to shake up their design, shake up the stones they were using, and look at the way women wanted to wear jewellery, which began to be different.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I love her work anyway, and I think, it looked like a lot of fun as well. I mean, yeah. I think
she wasn't classically trained, and I think there's a lot to that. I know, sorry, Stephen, that you went to college and you spent years learning. But in her way, I think she had the sort of fashion background and the costume background, and she had that sense of freedom, so she could kind of do what she wanted.
Yeah,
and it was very refreshing. It was like a breath of fresh air, kind of swept through the industry. And a lot of the big fashion houses followed suit, and all the big fine jewelry brands began to think that they had to cater more for what women wanted and what they were wearing.
Yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. Actually, another point that you made there, you thought you might be insulting me, but not, about the fact that she wasn't classically trained. It's quite interesting that I think, you know, you obviously you need people to be classically trained in any subject, but you know, there's a few cases I think of people who've come along into this industry and really shaken it up. I mean,
Yes.
Jar would be another example, I think, you know, he came from a completely different space. And I think just every now and again, it kind of needs that. Otherwise, an industry it's sort of quite happy with itself. You know, you say, well, this is the way it's done. And then someone comes along and goes, hang on a minute, I can look at it completely differently. And she was a perfect example. Jar's another one. I mean, even to an extent, Solange, you know, Solange Azaguri Partridge, you know, I mean.
Well, looking back, there was Georges Schlumberger, who was not classically trained. There was Ilko de Vidura. And I think sometimes they sort of cut their teeth on costume, and that gives them this sort of liberation that they don't think about the value of stones. They think about the artistic merit and whether it's going to achieve what they want. Yeah,
no, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Very interesting. So let's go on to the new Stone Age.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think this one suggests a sort of existential look at the sort of the bedrock, if you like, of the Earth's crust.
Good word, Stephen.
the Earth's crust and the journey for, you know, crystals, its power, the beliefs that surround it, and its place in jewellery historically. I know you are going to expand on that a bit, and you know, and then, you know, into someone like a designer like myself, that I think I found something in it that was just about a material that, you know, it felt like the volume of it and the fact that it wasn't so precious allowed me to use it in a different way. So I think I'd like to know, first of all, about your crystal journey.
Okay.
And what made it sort of worthy of a book, a whole book from your point of view.
Basically, this book started as an article that I did in British Vogue, January 2018. I wanted to do a story for the new year, something kind of hopeful and thoughtful, and thinking of, we all think of a new year, how to feel better. And so I did a story called The Master Healers. And I sort of said something witty like, you know, don't forget your minerals every day, something like that. And we photographed a lot of jewelry, and I wrote a story, and I've done a crystal reading in Los Angeles. And actually, in the course of doing this article, I thought there was so much more to be said and so much more I wanted to understand and know about. And I went on this kind of journey to talk to people, to discover about it, because I felt it wasn't a fashion and it wasn't a trend. It was more of a movement of people wanting to look back at how the ancients trusted and had comfort and an element of protection from the stones and crystals they used to navigate through the complexities of contemporary life with all its challenges. And I mean, it's extraordinary that it's now being published in the middle of this pandemic, because I talk about climate change, I talk about how young people want to use something and more drawn to something with a sense of meaning that's not only honouring the earth, which we obviously need to do now, and everybody understands that is wanting to save the planet, but also something that they can use to help with their own private goals and what they want to achieve in their life, and how they want to have more sort of mindful responses that aren't so driven by fear and panic and just the fast pace of the life we all live now.
Yeah. So
it's going to be quite topical. It's topical. It's about what we're living right now.
It's right in the zeitgeist. You're absolutely right. And I think that I think where we're at right now with you know, the whole coronavirus and, you know, lockdown and God knows what, a lot of what's now come to a crashing kind of head, if you like, we were heading that way, weren't we? You know, it doesn't matter if it was good things or bad things. It doesn't matter. This is now just sort of, you go, right, now it's galvanized everything that was sort of, you know, I mean, we probably have all been looking at different, webinars and podcasts and God knows what, they're dealing with the current situation. And it just feels like a lot of where we were going, whether it was, this is some sort of act of God, if you like, to just say, you got to stop because you're destroying everything, or the fact that, we were going this way, it was probably going to end up in some form or another without a virus where things were going to have to come to an end, because we were taking too much. We were, just spoiling everything. And I think, with something like, the subject you're dealing with, do you think that apart from this sort of the amulet side of it, do you think it gives people, does it give people a calmness? Do you think that they, there's something about a crystal, and I mean, you mentioned before the fact that it's come out of the earth, which I think is really, really important, that you feel connected to the earth with it, but that it sort of helps us to just feel balances. Maybe that is something. I
think people are looking for meaning, and I think they're looking for things they can trust. I think particularly for young people, I think, we've all read about the effects, the marvel. I thank God for technology while we're all in isolation, and it's opened up our lives. It enables us to connect in this extraordinary way, but it's also piled so much pressure, as we know, on young people, their mental health. And I think the fact is that people are using social media as some kind of gatekeeper in their life. It's very untrusting. And, if President Trump's put anything in our life, he's put the idea of fake news. There's so much fake. What do we trust? Yeah. And I think that's driving people to look for something with meaning. And there's certainly no way a stone can change you or heal you, but used in a way that you sit with it, set it with intentions. It can change and alter your incentives, your evaluations, and maybe improve the outcomes of your life. And, plus sitting quietly, it propels a sense of stillness in you, which, as we all know, can sort of calm the levels of anxiety that I don't believe there's anyone in the country who hasn't felt in the last month. It's like panic, fear, anxiety, depression, all these things. And I think there's a longing out there for ritual that's been taken away from us. We have no gatekeepers in our day. The days we don't even know what day it is. It's kind of morphing into the same. And those kind of little tent poles of ritual are very important. And also that sense of nature. And I think that's why so many people have been jogging and trying to get into nature. And crystals, as we know, these are tiny things that you can bring into any space, any small space, and you have that sense of nature with you, and you can carry it with you, which I think is part of the interest and meaning in these crystals at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. So let's now pull that into a jewelry. I know we've kind of hit on it a little bit, but into a kind of a, its uses and its place in jewelry, because I think you kind of, as jeweler and as someone whose life is spent with jewelry like yourself, you kind of, it's very easy to sort of look at one side of this sort of crystal freak, the kind of the hippie, the person who doesn't really move on. And that type of jewelry, which we know exists, and then sort of bringing that material into something that's much more refined, I guess. The use of it, and part of something that becomes maybe more structured. Which is, I know that you're extremely, you've done a lot of research in your book, but you probably knew a lot about it already. But sort of the history of that into jewelry, if you want to fill us in a little bit.
Well, the ancient Japanese called crystal the perfect jewel, because for them it symbolized space, purity, and perseverance. And I think there's really, really good qualities. And they also had a lovely name that I think I'm the sort of person, although the name crystal was created by the ancient Greeks when they first came across this extraordinary frozen water. They called it crystallos because it looked like water, but it was cold to the touch and hard. So they figured it must have been frozen by the gods, and something frozen by the gods would never be unfrozen. So it has this sort of this liquid beauty. And here I could equate it with diamonds, really, in the way that diamonds are like liquid water. But for me, the ones with inclusions are more interesting. And when you get these crystals, they have little fractures internally. It has that sort of liquid appearance of sort of perfection. But actually, I rather like the pieces that have the inner fractures. And in those fractures, there's little pieces of water or liquid carbon dioxide. And it almost, it looks like little veins and wisps of mist and fire and smoke. And the ancient Japanese called these breath of the white dragon, which I think is so romantic.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, forever, the Mayans, Aztecs, Incas have all used crystal in their healing rituals and put it into feel-good pieces of jewelry that people could wear and carry with them.
So we were fortunate enough on an earlier edition of Gold Digging to have a guest of Shelley von Strunkel, and she was really, really fascinating because we sort of got her as a guest because we were talking about the astrology and, you know, that side of jewelry. And then I didn't know that she was so knowledgeable about gems and gemology. And she was the first person that, I didn't really think about it before, but she sort of questioned this whole modern idea of what your birthstone is and how that was sort of created, if you like, by in a fairly modern time. And prior to that, you know, the idea of someone's birthstone would have been much more about this sort of idea of stones that balanced you out, which in a way is I think, you know, more in line with the way you're talking about a more ancient way of including crystals. So, you know, if somebody's quite sort of hyper, then you'd want to use the stones like moonstones and, you know, these types of stones may be more tonally, you know.
I agree. I think the colour is really important. And I think the list of birthstones really came into being in the last century when George Kunz, who was the chief gemologist at Tiffany, came up with it. And so it's a really nice thing, and people like it because it adds a bit of meaning to their jewelry and it makes it very personal. But I agree. I think colour is very important, and I think everyone's drawn to a colour. And I've, in the book, sectioned certain stones into different colours and suggested that certain contemporary issues that we all deal with now, that they might be beneficial for that, and with some people's stories and experiences, their own personal experiences.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just turn a bit into the way that I've used quartzes and crystals in my jewelry, because it's been for now some time, and this year, right
when
now,
was the first time, Stephen? Was it 25 years ago or longer?
Well, 25 years ago we launched Crystal Haze, which by name and by nature, the hero of that, you know, that particular collection was quartz and materials that were definitely, most of them were sort of there in jewelry, but I think they weren't so much the hero.
And were you aware of its energy at that moment? Were you thinking that's why you wanted to use it?
No, not really. I was aware of it, but that wasn't what drew me to want to incorporate it into my product. I think I'd sort of been inspired by deco jewelry and, you know, pieces, Belperron and Cartier art, you know, the deco period where there was lots of use of clear quartz, and, you know, sometimes it was frosted and just different treatments of basically the quartz crystal. And I just thought that looked so super modern and clean. And at the time I was in a place, I was living in Canada, and my boss this was in the very early 80s, was a real sort of rock hound. I mean, he just loved, he was a gemologist and geologist and stuff, and he just loved to be sort of near mineral specimens, and he employed me to kind of like take some of that and turn it into jewellery. So I was sort of coming at it really left field, if you like, from where I had been when I'd been living in London and been, you know, done my apprenticeship in Hatton Garden, and it was a much more formal approach to everything. You know, there was certainly some designer jewelers out there that were, you know, pushing the boundaries, if you like, of a less formal type of jewelry, less structured. You know, Andrew Greener probably being the one that most sort of associated with that period. But to be honest, he was like right out on the fringe, as you know. And I think most jewelry was not like that. It was really formal, and you really were limited on what you could sort of use that was considered to be fine jewelry. Even if, like I say, a period before, in a deco period and way before, you know, there was many more things that were just jewelry. I think there was, that period was much more about diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, rubies, pearls, you know, gold, etc., platinum, and then it wasn't so much in, you know, I think just for a consumer, they probably wouldn't have been able to say, well, I'd like to see some jewelry with some, you know, some falcon's eye or some quartz in it. You go, okay, well, I don't know where you'd go for that. But this guy, when I was in Canada living in this sort of ski resort, was that guy. And he introduced me to, first of all, to go into Tucson, which we're going to talk about a bit later. But, and just that world, it was like, wow, you know, this isn't going to a gem dealer's gem box and looking through some rubies to incorporate into a design. This is like a world of the new Stone Age, if you like. You know, everything that came out of the Earth's surface, mainly, or below it, was on offer, and that felt like, okay, that means I can use it. And I think, so from a design aesthetic point of view, you know, this sort of deco style use of quartz, and then being exposed to the material, and certainly at that time, and to a certain extent now, you know, you haven't got quite the restrictions of the preciousness of it. And I think all these things felt like you could let go a bit and use it in a way that you would never have been able to use a more precious gemstone. And I think they were the things that, to me, you know, I wanted to start to bring into my jewelry. And so way before 25 years ago, we're now talking like more like 40 years ago, I was using it, but it wasn't until I kind of started this idea of this extreme doublet, which became a crystal haze, that I really went for it. And then discovered that by doing something that was a little bit out of the box, that there was a client for that. You know, it was just something that, you know, came to me by chance, but then I was able to adapt it into a way that I think started to look like something that was, well, it certainly became fashionable. I don't know if I started it thinking it was going to be. It was completely different, but it started to head into a place where, you know, I think it was probably, you know, like mid-90s, where women were starting to venture into a jewelry space and make their own purchases.
Be interesting to see for your new collection if some of the clients are different, and whether A, they're younger, B, they have this idea of what they also want from the crystal, not just the decorative effect, but they also want some sort of protective effect, or they're looking for something that has that little extra meaning to them. Yeah,
well, I hope so. But I think, for all the reasons that we've hit upon with your book, and, you know, this sort of where we sit right now, that I think people will be looking for that from almost anything. They're going to be looking for the extra bit, which will probably be the reason why someone might make a choice about what it is they buy, you know. And I'm very hopeful, of course, without being too commercial here, that, you know, with using these kind of materials that feel earthly and historically come with these sort of extra benefits, if you like, that might be the reason why someone might say, oh, well, actually, I need a ring, whether it's a gift, a purchase, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But I think that's what I'd like right now. You know, I mean, it's definitely something that is shifting again in the jewelry place of what their requirements are of the jewelry they wear, I think, you know, and I
think people will be buying quite differently after this. I think how they're going to want something with, as I say, more meaning, something more special. I think something that they're going to be shopping more mindfully, I think, and probably want to know more about how it's made and feel very involved. I think it's got to have that real personal attachment.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And something else you said, which I completely 100% believe will be the case, because it was, like I was saying as well, it was leading that way. You know, this idea of imperfection being celebrated as opposed to it's an imperfection. Yes. And I think we'd all got very much, because of the diamond industry, to be quite honest, you know, if it's perfect, it's called a D flawless, and anything else is not quite perfect. Is really, I don't think it's where that's at right now. And I think you and I are very aware of the fact that
I think
the diamond industry, they're aware of that fact as well, you know.
I think the fact is something's a treasure from the earth. You want it to see part of that journey, because they've had this extraordinary journey, which is what gives them this sort of sense of magic, is that they've survived these upheavals, geological shifts, erosions, some of them for, you know, millions of years, some not so long, but they've still had this extraordinary journey. And you want some element of that. You want the acknowledgement of that, and that is in its own journey is reflected in its chemical composition, its colour, some of those, as we say, imperfect inclusions, which sounds like an imperfection, but it isn't. It's its story, which makes it this sort of natural treasure.
Yeah, I think even within the diamond industry, I know that some of the sort of newer designers that have come along, and it's probably a little bit like this idea of someone coming from outside the industry, coming in and sort of saying, well, okay, that diamond, that's clear, it's nice, it's sparkly, but this one's got bits in it. That looks really, really interesting, you know. But it's not necessarily someone from outside the industry. I think what you've got now is a generation of younger designers that just don't want to abide by those rules, and their clients are exactly the same. You know, I mean, one of the designers that came through my Rock Vault platform, you know, which is sort of for emerging talent, Rachel Boston, you know, her father had been a diamond dealer. So she'd come from sort of a diamond family, and he would have been very much in the conventional, you know, what that means to be a diamond dealer, which would have conformed to these, you know, like all the categories we talked about, the categorization of what a diamond is, from perfect to not quite. And the only stones she was using are the ones that were heavily, heavily included, you know, to the point where a stone is kind of now grey through inclusion. You know, and I think it was really interesting, actually, because after she graduated through Rockville, I went round to her little store in Shoreditch, and she was having a roaring trade. I mean, she said to me, I'm making, at the moment, I've got 29 engagement rings I'm making, and every single one of them was about one of these stones. You know, forget the perfect bit. They wanted that because that became their stone. And
I think even before that, didn't we have Jacqueline Cullen in Rock Vault? And
Jacqueline, I just used her as an example.
But she used Whitby Jet, and it's incredibly notoriously hard to work with, and it often had lots of fractures in it, and she made those fractures part of her design.
Yeah.
So they were highlighted as something extraordinary and special as part of her design.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what amazing work she does. So I've got a couple of bits here. I'm going to lead into Tucson, and I've got this piece of, look at this, looks like a piece of coconut ice. And it's pink opal. It's Peruvian. It's got a lovely crust on the outside there. And I bought an oil drum's worth of this in Tucson from a Peruvian miner. And I think when I bought it back, because oil drum's a lot, isn't it? It's like a big lump of material. And I think my brother, I work with Dave, he's like, what are we going to do with that? I said, well, look, don't worry, we'll get through it. And the fact is we did get through it, because when I started to incorporate that, like I say, it couldn't feel more, that you've chipped a bit off the old block of the Earth's crust, if you like. And we started to put it in crystal haze, and it has a lovely name, this Peruvian pink opal. Somebody named it angel skin. You go, all right, well, there you go. That's a great name. And it just became a massive success. It was this, no one really knew what it was.
But how do you know what it is, Stephen, when you're buying, like, having been to Tucson with you, and I see some of these guys, and they're there with this great barrel of emeralds or whatever they've got. How do you know? How do you know where it's come from?
Yeah, well, trust me, I've had my moments there. I never forget negotiating with a Moroccan guy with one eye, and I was looking in his one eye, saying, you're promising me this is what it is, because sometimes it's really difficult to tell. But I think on the whole, there's always trust in everything, no matter what. But if you turn up at a place like Tucson, you've been there, you are not being taken for a ride. You are seeing these rocks as they are. Now, the skill, I think, is not so much you saying, do you know what that is? It's about, how can I use it? Is this something that there's a place, like I've got another piece of, this is hematite, which, it couldn't get more bloody gnarly looking. There's nothing glamorous about that. But when it's in a piece of my jewelry, it looks really glamorous. It's amazing. And I think that's sort of my 40 years of looking at rocks, if you like, to think, I know what I can do with that. But buying it in that way, and I think I've certainly seen, and you've experienced it as well now, that looking at that as a source for sophisticated, modern, designed jewelry is, certainly over the last 5 years, there's been a shift towards that kind of material, and now with the big, fashion houses, conglomerates, last year, Gucci Group were there, it means everybody's now looking this way. I don't think they certainly from that area, there wasn't the focus, but.
And what I was so impressed by, I met so many guys who were, mining things like Montana sapphires and all these kind of small artisanal miners through the States, represented there. And when you talk to them, their whole passion was to leave the earth better. Some of them were going to old mines that had been left in the 60s in disastrous states, and they were actually finding gems, but also cleaning up the earth. Yeah. And I thought, wherever you went, people were so aware and talking about that, which was great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the fact that, with most of those people, like you were sort of saying there, you're dealing with the person who brings it out of the ground on the whole. You're not going to an office and there's several layers of buying and that's gone on between you and the product. When you're buying this type of material, and at a place like Tucson, the guys have got dirty fingernails. They spend the rest of the year down a hole. If I go back to those sort of 25 years and more, things like chrysoprase, chalcedony, they were sort of readily available. You could kind of go and you get a beautiful lump of really green chrysoprase, might be from Australia or New Zealand or somewhere where it's mined, or in Africa, and you could buy a lump and you'd buy it by the kilo, and it was affordable because I didn't have a lot of money. I could afford to buy it and then come back and play with it, and that is almost all gone now. It's kind of, you sort of realize that there's that these things, it doesn't matter if they're not the highest value, intrinsic value to us. they are finite, you know, and that becomes really apparent when you go to a place like Tucson, but where you feel like there's an abundance of everything. It doesn't matter. It's just a rock, you know. You can go and find something like a falcon's eye, and then the next time you go and say, oh wow, I haven't seen any falcon's eye for 10 years, you know. And so I quite like that as well. I mean, it's annoying. It's really annoying if you want to do a collection that you need it, but sometimes you just have to go, you know what, you can't get that anymore.
Yeah, these things are rare, and I think that's also why some of the big houses, you know, Cartier's always had that history with colour and history with incorporating different stones, and as you talked about the Art Deco period particularly. But I think recently they've all been turning to some of these hard stones, rose quartz, lapis lazuli, malachite, and I think part of it is all gemstones, as you say, to get large, perfect gemstones, it's very difficult and they are rare. So I think to widen their colour palette, a lot of them are looking at these stones now to incorporate into their jewellery to get that extraordinary range of colour.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I was going actually just to sort of finish up on that a bit. I didn't really ask you about your experience. You hit on it a little bit, but you came to Tucson 2 years ago. Yeah. And I met with you there, and I had one day with you. I know you were there for longer. So what was your kind of, I don't know, what were you expecting to find, and did you find it, or was it completely different?
Tucson was incredible because it's everything. It's just from those absolutely vast 80-carat perfect sapphires down to little bits of tiny sort of specks of emerald or ruby or strange stones or dinosaur poo. Fossils, anything that, you know, is old from the earth is celebrated, and it's there. Anything you can find, even a sort of entire dinosaur virtually. And the great spears and spikes of rock crystal were the extraordinary pieces for me. And the characters who bought them and found them, and that everyone there has got that in common. They've got that love of stone and crystal in common. And you know, I went from meeting all the retailers, having, you know, line dancing and tequilas, to sitting with the Smithsonian, who were then buying to add to their collection. And I think Jeffrey Post of the Smithsonian was the person really who underlined that in the museum, their natural specimens are the biggest change agent they have in the museum. That he said, what's the point of having all these specimens on show if we don't actually change the way people think when they look at them?
Sorry, what do you mean by change element? What?
Well, that he said they were so thought-provoking, that they're the things that that fascinated people most when they come to the museum, and propel them to think differently about the world and the world around them, as well as themselves. Yeah. No, it's, I mean, I'm not a collector of mineral specimens, but I know lots of people who are. And in fact, I once had to deliver a specimen. I forget what it was. It was such a long time ago, but I delivered from this guy I worked for in Canada. He had a specimen that the Natural History Museum in London bought. And I had to deliver it. I brought it back with me and did all the duty and delivered it there. And I think at that time, because it was probably in the early 80s, I'd never even visited the mineral hall. You know, if I went to the Natural History Museum, I went to see the dinosaurs. You know, I'd been a kid, if you like. And then I'm not in there. And I mean, since then, I've been to Smithsonian. I've seen lots of mineral halls and specimens in gem halls, but they're absolutely mind-blowing. And I mean, there's one particular booth in Tucson where they've just got the most exquisite ones that you can't imagine that this thing sort of came out of a place in the earth. You know, you just think, no, someone must have put that one together. You know, there's these bright yellow that almost look like something that's, you know, grown as like a plant, like a flower blooms, and you go, well, there's a daffodil, and these things look like that, but they're crystals. Of
course they have grown, but over a period of, you know, millions of years in a place that allowed them to grow by the fact that there was the elements there. But everybody would be fascinated by them. I don't think you could leave it and not have an emotion about seeing some of the spectacle of it and the beauty of what that is. Yeah.
I'm sure that's what made people think early on, that looking into crystal and seeing this fairy frost inside and almost the wispy smoke that made patterns, that they imagined they could see the future. I'm sure that was where the whole kind of crystal gazing came from.
Yeah.
Because it sort of ignites something in your imagination, totally.
It's quite funny, isn't it? I've spoken to you about it before, but that idea of, you know, a crystal ball, looking into it and seeing either somebody's past or future. Let me gaze into my crystal ball. Yeah.
Can we not do that in the new Crystal Haze pieces then, Stephen?
Just gaze into them. Oh, trust me, I do a lot of that. Yeah. Yeah. Looking to look for something that maybe.
And what colours have you used with them?
Well, I've tried to sort of revisit what gave it a uniqueness 25 years ago, because I think, like a lot of things, you start one way with maybe a rawness, you know, this is new, and you go about it in a certain way, and I couldn't stop. You know, I'm like, once I'd kind of perfected that this technique was going to work, and that I had this whole, you know, color palette that was available to me, because now anything that had a color that I felt, you know, if it was magnified under this quartz was worth a shot. Not everything worked, but a lot of it did, you know. So, you know, turquoise was one that I used a lot, and then the hematites and falcon's eye, which is this sort of dark blue tiger's eye, beautiful stone, and tiger's eye, and so many things, silver obsidian, different opals. And I think that was like initially, and I think I'd mentioned before about chrysoprase and chalcedony, and some of those I just can't replicate, you know, because that material is just not, it's just not enough of it for me to be able to say, because I need quite a lot of volume of material to make crystal haze stone. And so I've sort of, over the years, sort of start to do what a lot of people do. You kind of get driven a bit by merchandising, you know. So you say, oh, well, let's narrow down what we make available, because otherwise there's too many SKUs involved, and goes against everything I think we should be doing, but it doesn't matter. It's the way it works. And I think now with this 25-year celebration, we sort of come back and looked at what is possible, you know. And so when I was preparing for it 2 years ago, I was with you in Tucson, I was like, right, I just want to see everything that I can work with. So falcon's eye, hematite, silver obsidian, the different opals. What else I've got? I'm going to refer to my daughter over here. Bullseye. Fire opal. I've got a lot. I've got a whole color palette, and I want people to be part of the process of discovering what that means when it's in a piece of my jewelry. You know, I mean, I won't be the only one using those materials, but I might be the only one using some of that stuff that's out there on the fringes, you know, because I'm not too familiar with that much jewelry that has silver obsidian in it, you know, because it's beautiful on its own, but it really comes to life when it's used in a crystal haze stone. So I'm putting it all out, and we'll sort of see what comes back. I want it to feel surprising to people, because it was surprising 25 years ago. So it'll be now to a new generation, I think, and see how the reaction is.
Great.
So I don't know. You know, I could gaze into my crystal ball, but yeah. So
well, I think it's pretty well timed.
Yeah, it does. It feels like it's the same. You know, obviously, that's why we're talking about your book. So when does your book come out?
It is. There's a big story tomorrow in. Not tomorrow. So it's just come out in the FT and How to Spend It magazine, and it's pre-ordering on Amazon. We'll have a little more press about it and stories about it on Instagram and different social media platforms. But it's basically on Barnes and Noble, any bookstore. But I'm pre-ordering at the moment. Consignments from the US have been held up in the whole pandemic, but it's nearly here.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'm really looking forward to it. And, I like to say, you all of your books have all been very, very interesting and delving beyond the obvious, I think, in jewellery. But this one will be of particular interest to me. So we're getting close to the end of this podcast. You've been a great guest, Carol. I knew you would be. And I'm gonna ask you to participate in. You see this is a golden shovel. Well, obviously this is called gold digging. So
okay.
There we go. You've got the full extent of it there. So what I'm going to do, usually with my guests, we would be photographed together with this golden shovel.
Okay.
But we can't do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give you a little quiz, right? So, so on my golden shovel is a piece of gold, but it's obviously not. It's not obvious, otherwise that'd be too easy. So I want you to tell me if this is real gold or fool's gold.
Hold on a minute.
And like I said, it's not obvious.
I can't even see it.
It's a big boulder. Yeah, it's a big rock. So just give it a shot. Gold. Gold. Good choice. Why would I ever want to fool you with fool's gold? So yeah, it's whoop, there we go. It's actually a piece of gold ore that I extracted myself from the first ever fair trade certified gold mine in Peru.
Fantastic.
I went down and I went 2 miles in. It was one of the most frightening things I've ever done because it wasn't safe in any way. I mean, it was, but I think, okay, these guys, they go in there every day. I'm going in. I was very interested at the time, it was 10 years ago, in what fair trade meant to someone's life, like a gold miner. And it came out, they gave me that. I didn't steal it. And that's how the gold comes out of that mine. It's just a rock, and then they got to crush it and extract the bit of gold out of it. But yeah, so
here is some fool's gold, some pyrite.
Oh, lovely! Look at that, suspended in a perspex box.
Yes, that's fool's gold.
Yeah. All right. Good.
You can see exactly why people were fooled by it.
Oh, no, look, I don't want to outdo you, but I just happen to have bloody massive piece.
Oh, okay.
This is actually a doorstop in my house, but I tend to have a lot of rocks lying around.
Me too.
Of no particular value, but that doesn't matter. Yeah. So thank you so much for being.
Thank you for having me, and I hope we will meet again, Stephen.
We will. We don't know where, don't know when, but we'll meet again some sunny day. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you, Carol.